Welcome to part 3 of our series, Great Chapters from the Old Testament. This series is a compilation of a previous collection of daily devotionals that combined Old and New Testament chapters. In this study, we'll look at a few of the Old Testament chapters. To say that some chapters are great while others are not so great would be a mistake. I've stated many times and in many ways that every chapter is great because it is inspired by God to be recorded and preserved through the ages for us today. They are as relevant and useful today as then. Still, in an effort to encourage people to read the Bible, I have endeavored to choose some of the most well-known chapters and some of the not so well-known chapters and read them with just a few words, added some devotional thoughts to that chapter. Each chapter combined with the reading and devotional thoughts is about 10 minutes in length, more or less. In our last class, we looked at 4 different chapters, 2 from the book of Job and 2 from the book of Genesis. Job chapter 1, we looked at Job, blameless and upright. We looked at Job 38, God answers Job. And then we came back to Genesis chapter 22, where God tests Abraham, and Genesis chapter 27, Isaac blesses Jacob. In part 3 of our lesson today, we'll look at 4 more great chapters. Genesis chapter 32, Jacob wrestles with God. Genesis chapter 37, Joseph's dreams. Genesis chapter 50, Joseph buries Jacob. And we move into the book of Exodus, Exodus chapter 3, the burning bush. Again, as I've stated before, these are not great theological pontifications, nor are they a word-for-word or verse-by-verse detailed study, but rather a general overview of the chapters. Enough to whet our appetite and hopefully pique your interest to further read and study the book of books, the Holy Bible. Now, part 3 of our study of the great chapters of the Old Testament. Hello and welcome to another in our series, Great Chapters of the Bible. Today we'll be reading from the book of Genesis, chapter 32. Jacob wrestles with God. Beginning in verse 1. Jacob went on his way, and the angels of God met him. When Jacob saw them, he said, "This is God's camp." So he called the name of that place Mahanaim. And Jacob sent messengers before him to Esau his brother in the land of Seir, the country of Edom, instructing them, "Thus you shall say to my lord Esau, Thus says your servant Jacob, I have sojourned with Laban and stayed until now. I have oxen, donkeys, flocks, male servants and female servants. I have sent to tell my lord in order that I may find favor in your sight." And the messengers returned to Jacob, saying, "We came to your brother Esau, and he is coming to meet you, and there are 400 men with him." Then Jacob was greatly afraid and distressed. He divided the people who were with him, and the flocks and the herds and camels, into 2 camps, thinking, if Esau comes to one camp and attacks it, then the camp that is left will escape. And Jacob said, "O God of my father Abraham, and God of my father Isaac, O Lord, who said to me, Return to your country and to your kindred, that I may do you good. I'm not worthy of the least of all the deeds of steadfast love and all the faithfulness that you have shown to your servant. For with only my staff I crossed this Jordan, and now I have become 2 camps. Please deliver me from the hand of my brother, from the hand of Esau, for I fear him, that he may come and attack me, the mothers with the children. But you said, I will surely do you good, and make your offspring as the sand of the sea, which cannot be numbered for multitude." So he stayed there that night, and from what he had with him, he took a present for his brother Esau, 200 female goats and 20 male goats, 200 ewes and 20 rams, 30 milking camels and their calves, 40 cows and 10 bulls, 20 female donkeys and 10 male donkeys. These he handed over to his servants. Every drove by itself, and said to his servants, "Pass on ahead of me, put a space between drove and drove." He instructed the first, "When Esau my brother meets you and asks you, 'To whom do you belong? Where are you going, and whose are these ahead of you?' Then you shall say, They belong to your servant Jacob. They are a present sent to my lord Esau. And moreover, he is behind us. He likewise instructed the second and third and all who follow the droves. You shall say the same thing to Esau when you find him. And you shall say, Moreover, your servant Jacob is behind us. For he thought, I may appease him with the present that goes ahead of me, and afterward I shall see his face. Perhaps he will accept me. So the present passed on ahead of him, and he himself stayed that night in the camp. The same night he arose and took his 2 wives, his 2 female servants, and his 11 children, and crossed the ford of the Jabbok. He took them and sent them across the stream, and everything else that he had. And Jacob was left alone. And a man wrestled with him until the breaking of the day. When the man saw that he did not prevail against Jacob, he touched his hip socket, and Jacob's hip was put out of joint as he wrestled with him. Then he said, Let me go, for the day has broken. But Jacob said, I will not let you go unless you bless me. And he said to him, What is your name? And he said, Jacob. Then he said, Your name shall no longer be called Jacob, but Israel, for you have striven with God and with men, and have prevailed. Then Jacob asked him, Please tell me your name. But he said, Why is it that you ask my name? And there he blessed him. So Jacob called the name of the place Peniel, saying, For I have seen God face to face, and yet my life has been delivered. The sun rose upon him as he passed Peniel, limping because of his hip. Therefore, to this day the people of Israel do not eat the sinew of the thigh that is on the hip socket, because he touched the socket of Jacob's hip on the sinew of the thigh. There's a rather colloquial saying I recall from my youth that I heard quoted when someone was about to get what was coming to them. The chickens have come home to roost. Having lived on a farm and raised not a few chickens, I understood this saying on a rudimentary level. No matter where those chickens wandered throughout the day, they would eventually come back to the henhouse and roost there. As I became older, I realized this saying on a deeper level. The wrong you do today will someday come back on you. I've read in newspapers from time to time of a person who committed a crime in their youth and then lived a fairly uneventful life until one day evidence comes out that implicates them and they are convicted of that crime. It's not always the big crimes that come back, but indeed the small ones as well. Those chickens have been busy throughout history, that's for sure. After 20 years' absence from his home, Jacob is told by God in Genesis 31:3, Return to the land of your fathers and to your kindred, and I will be with you. First, Jacob deals with Laban in chapter 31 and then begins his some 400-mile trek back to face the unfinished business with his brother Esau. Remember, there were no pleasantries or fond farewells exchanged. Do you recall the scene from Genesis 27:41? Now, Esau hated Jacob because of the blessing with which his father had blessed him. And Esau said to himself, The days of mourning for my father are approaching. Then I will kill my brother Jacob. Jacob had a lot of time to contemplate that first exchange they will have. Maybe it will be like, well, Esau, friend of years, friend to tears. Or Esau, old buddy, old pal. Or maybe, my brother, how's mom and dad? Day after day, it must have worn on him. In the meantime, some rather strange events come upon Jacob. First, he meets a band of angels from God at a place he will name Mahanaim. Next, he sends messengers to inform Esau of his return. When they return and inform Jacob that not only is Esau coming, but he's bringing 400 men with him. Jacob, greatly distressed, begins to devise a plan whereby he can, at the very least, survive an assault, and best case scenario, assuage the anger of Esau by gifts. It is then that Jacob is driven to prayer. He reminds God that it was his idea to return and that God might ought to remember that promise he made to do him good. You know, just in case God forgot. Jacob then divides the traveling party and takes with him his wives, their servants, and his 11 children, and all that he had, and crosses the Jabbok River. Then one of the strangest occurrences of the Old Testament takes place. Jacob is alone, and we are told he wrestles with a man all night long. Hosea tells us that Jacob fought with an angel. In Hosea chapter 12 and verses 3 through 4, we read, "In the womb he took his brother by the heel, and in his manhood he strove with God. He strove with the angel and prevailed. He wept and sought his favor. He met God at Bethel, and there God spoke with us." Jacob realizes and proclaims that he has fought with none other than God himself, the pre-incarnate Christ, identified in other passages as the angel of the Lord. Take a look and see in Genesis 16:7 and Genesis 22:11, Joshua 5:13 and Judges 2:1, Judges 6:11 and Judges 13:13. In Genesis 32:30 we read, "So Jacob called the name of the place Peniel, saying, For I have seen God face to face, and yet my life has been delivered." It was there that Jacob's life and name was changed. Jacob has seemingly wrestled to a standstill and wants to know the name of his adversary. We read in verses 27 through 28, "What is your name?" And he said, "Jacob." Then he said, "Your name shall no longer be called Jacob, but Israel. For you have striven with God and with men, and have prevailed." Imagine fulfilling your name's meaning your whole life. The supplanter, the deceiver, the defrauder, to seize by the heel or to trip up. That's what the Hebrew word for Jacob means. All because you were born clutching your brother's heel. But now your name, Israel, means he will rule as God, or Prince of God. Once a man who by his own cunning had stolen the birthright and the blessing, and had been used and taken advantage by his uncle. He had struggled from birth, and now, crippled and helpless, and facing his brother, who once threatened to kill him, has called upon God for help, and has prevailed, and will continue to prevail. Jacob/Israel will live many, many more years, and endure much heartache and pain. But his name will be the inheritance of the people of God. Even today, the church, the Christian, is known as the Israel of God in Romans 9:6. Jacob spent many years learning the lesson that it was God who was truly in charge of his life and had blessed him. One wonders that even today, if people will spend their lives wrestling against God, and if they will one day come to that realization that it was God all along blessing them. Have you found that to be true? And Lord willing, let's meet here again tomorrow, and let's look at another great chapter in the Bible. Hello, and welcome to another in our series of the great chapters in the Bible. Our chapter today comes from the Old Testament book of Genesis, chapter 37, the dreams of Joseph. Beginning in verse 1, Jacob lived in the land of his father's sojournings in the land of Canaan. These are the generations of Jacob. Joseph, being 17 years old, was pasturing the flock with his brothers. He was a boy with the sons of Bilhah and Zilpah, his father's wives, and Joseph brought a bad report of them to their father. Now Israel loved Joseph more than any other of his sons, because he was a son of his old age, and he made him a robe of many colors. But when his brothers saw that their father loved him more than all his brothers, they hated him and could not speak peacefully to him. Now Joseph had a dream. When he told it to his brothers, they hated him even more. He said to them, "Hear this dream that I have dreamed. Behold, we were binding sheaves in the field, and behold, my sheaf arose and stood upright. Behold, your sheaves gathered around it and bowed down to my sheaf." His brothers said to him, "Are you indeed to reign over us? Or are you indeed to rule over us?" So they hated him even more for his dreams and for his words. Then he dreamed another dream, and behold, he told it to his brothers and said, Behold, I have dreamed another dream. Behold, the sun, the moon, and 11 stars were bowing down to me. But when he told it to his father and to his brothers, his father rebuked him and said to him, What is this dream that you have dreamed? Shall I and your mother and your brothers indeed come to bow ourselves to the ground before you? And his brothers were jealous of him, but his father kept the saying in mind. Now his brothers went to pasture their father's flock near Shechem. And Israel said to Joseph, Are not your brothers pasturing the flock at Shechem? Come, I will send you to them. And he said to him, Here I am. So he said to him, Go now, see if it is well with your brothers and with the flock, and bring me word. So he sent him from the valley of Hebron, and he came to Shechem. And a man found him wandering in the fields. And the man asked him, What are you seeking? I am seeking my brothers, he said. Tell me, please, where they are pasturing the flock. And the man said, They've gone away, for I heard them say, Let us go to Dothan. So Joseph went after his brothers and found them at Dothan. They saw him from afar, and before he came near to them, they conspired against him to kill him. They said to one another, Here comes the dreamer. Come now, let us kill him and throw him into one of the pits. Then we will say that a fierce animal has devoured him, and we'll see what has become of his dreams. But when Reuben heard it, he rescued him out of their hands, saying, Let us not take his life. And Reuben said to them, Shed no blood. Throw him into this pit here in the wilderness, but do not lay a hand on him, that he might rescue him out of their hands to restore him to his father. So when Joseph came to his brothers, they stripped him of his robe, the robe of many colors that he wore, and they took him and threw him into a pit. The pit was empty. There was no water in it. Then they sat down to eat, and looking up they saw a caravan of Ishmaelites coming from Gilead with their camels bearing gum, balm, and myrrh, on their way to carry it down to Egypt. Then Judah said to his brothers, What profit is it if we kill our brother and conceal his blood? Come, let us sell him to the Ishmaelites, and let not our hand be held upon him, for he is our brother, our own flesh. And his brothers listened to him. Then Midianite traders passed by, and they drew Joseph up and lifted him out of the pit and sold him to the Ishmaelites for 20 shekels of silver. They took Joseph to Egypt. When Reuben returned to the pit and saw that Joseph was not in the pit, he tore his clothes and returned to his brothers and said, The boy is gone, and I, where shall I go? Then they took Joseph's robe and slaughtered a goat and dipped the robe in the blood. And they sent the robe of many colors and brought it to their father and said, This we have found. Please identify whether it is your son's robe or not. And he identified it and said, It is my son's robe. A fierce animal has devoured him. Joseph is without doubt torn to pieces. Then Jacob tore his garments and put sackcloth on his loins and mourned for his son many days. All his sons and all his daughters rose up to comfort him. But he refused to be comforted and said, No, I shall go down to Sheol to my son mourning. Thus his father wept for him. Meanwhile the Midianites had sold him in Egypt to Potiphar, an officer of Pharaoh, the captain of the guard. Erma Bombeck once quipped, When you are asked if you have a favorite child, apparently you are expected to choose one of your own. From time to time, I ask people, sometimes complete strangers who are talking about their family, if they have a favorite child or a favorite grandchild. I always, without exception, get the same answer. No, I love them all the same. Yeah, right. Come on. You know you like one better than the rest. Now, I always knew I was my mother's favorite child. She never actually said so, but I knew by the way she treated me that I was the apple of her eye. My daughters have a running feud as to which one is my favorite. Well, I'd like to, once and for all, clear it up and tell them and you which one really is my favorite. But you'll have to wait until the end of this lesson to find out. Some background first about our chapter. It has been perhaps 14 years or so since Jacob, or Israel, left Paddan Aram and Laban's rule. Jacob makes peace with Esau. Rachel has died giving birth to Benjamin on the way. His sons murder an entire town because one man defiled their sister, Dinah. His father, Isaac, passes away. Jacob is now dwelling in Canaan. Jacob has made a rather bad mistake, one that is understandable and actually quite common. He has a favorite child. Why? Because he was a child born in his old age. I say it's not unusual because many a parent chooses a child for the same reason, because they are the last child born, or at least one of the last. The problem isn't because he has a favorite child, but rather because the other children know he has a favorite child. He shows it by giving him a coat or robe of many colors. Joseph really has the deck stacked against him, so to speak. He is the favorite. He has the robe to prove it, and he snitches on his brothers for a transgression that isn't revealed, but it is significant. If that weren't bad enough, Joseph then has 2 dreams that further irritates his 10 brothers. Remember, Benjamin is younger than him. Either Joseph is rather naive, or he just doesn't care that he is his father's favorite. His dreams are easily interpreted, and his brothers and father perceive that they are the ones who will bow down to this young whippersnapper. His brothers not only hated him, but were jealous of him as well. So much so that when he journeys to check up on them, they hatch a plan to kill him and bury him in a pit. What they attempt to do is to tempt fate. We will see what will become of his dreams. Keep reading there in Genesis 37. It's all there. Every sordid detail, all the dirty laundry of that flawed family. Murderers, deceivers, schemers, and liars. Every turn just seems to dig them deeper and deeper into their own pit. Then, to top it all off, they torture their poor father with a lie and let him believe his favorite child is dead. Verse 35 is so sad to read. All his sons and all his daughters rose up to comfort him, but he refused to be comforted and said, "No, I shall go down to Sheol, or the grave, to my son, mourning." Thus his father wept for him. As bad as this is for Joseph at this point, it's about to get even worse. Taken from his family, his homeland, and sold into slavery in Egypt, where he will languish as a servant and then in prison. You have to do some math based upon other passages, but Joseph will be in Egypt for about 20 years or so before laying eyes on his brothers again, and longer yet before he sees his father. That's a lot of time for bitterness and anger to build up inside. That's a lot of time for guilt and regret to settle in to his brothers, who now have to live with what they have done. Day after day, they no doubt watched their father wither over their brother, his son. Can you put yourself in the place of Jacob, or the 10 brothers, or Joseph? Maybe we have made those mistakes of showing favoritism. Maybe we have been the victim of being bullied because our parents showed us favoritism. Maybe we have treated others harshly over jealousy. You'll no doubt read ahead or have already read the account of what happens over the next 2 decades. It is an epic saga, and one that isn't resolved in a 60-minute TV show where everyone lives happily ever after with a minimum amount of suffering. I cannot help but muse when I read the end of this story after Jacob has died in Genesis chapter 50. Beginning in verse 17, we read, "Say to Joseph, 'Please forgive the transgression of your brothers and their sin, because they did evil to you. And now, please forgive the transgression of your servants of the God of your father.' Joseph wept when he spoke to them. His brothers also came and fell down before him and said, 'Behold, we are your servants.' But Joseph said to them, 'Do not fear, for am I in the place of God? As for you, you meant it evil against me, but God meant it for good, to bring it about that many people should be kept alive, as they are today. So do not fear, I will provide for you and your little ones.' Thus he comforted them and spoke kindly to them." How does Joseph do it? How does he figure it all out? How does he overcome those feelings he must have had locked in prison all those years away from his father, all those years of freedom that is lost? Maybe you and I have had some experiences that have challenged us to overcome such things. Perhaps not to this extent, but one that made us want to take matters in our own hands. If so, it will do us well to search and to find where Joseph got his strength from to put the past behind him. After all, isn't that a better path than the path of bitterness? Oh, and just so you know, if this passage has taught me anything, it's that I love all my children and grandchildren equally. Sorry, kids, you'll just have to live with that. Love your dad. And Lord willing, let's meet here again tomorrow and look at another great chapter in the Bible. Welcome to another in our great chapters of the Bible. Our chapter today is Genesis chapter 50. Joseph buries Jacob. We'll begin reading in verse 1. Then Joseph fell on his father's face and wept over him and kissed him. And Joseph commanded his servants, the physicians, to embalm his father. So the physicians embalmed Israel. 40 days were required for it, for that is how many are required for embalming. And the Egyptians wept for him 70 days. When the days of weeping for him were past, Joseph spoke to the household of Pharaoh, saying, If now I have found favor in your eyes, please speak in the ears of Pharaoh, saying, My father made me swear, saying, I'm about to die. In my tomb that I have hewed out for myself in the land of Canaan, there you shall bury me. Now therefore, let me please go up and bury my father. Then I will return. And Pharaoh answered, Go up and bury your father, as he made you swear. So Joseph went up to bury his father. With him went up all the servants of Pharaoh, the elders of his household, and all the elders of the land of Egypt, as well as all the household of Joseph, his brothers, and his father's household. Only their children, their flocks, and their herds were left in the land of Goshen. And there went up with him both chariots and horsemen. It was a very great company. When they came to the threshing floor of Atad, which is beyond the Jordan, they lamented there with a very great and grievous lamentation. And he made a mourning for his father 7 days. When the inhabitants of the land, the Canaanites, saw the mourning on the threshing floor of Atad, they said, This is a grievous mourning by the Egyptians. Therefore the place was named Abel Mizraim. It is beyond the Jordan. Thus his sons did for him as he had commanded them. For his sons carried him to the land of Canaan and buried him in the cave of the field of Machpelah, to the east of Mamre, which Joseph bought with the field from Ephron the Hittite to possess as a burying place. After he had buried his father, Joseph returned to Egypt with his brothers and all who had gone up with him to bury his father. When Joseph's brothers saw that their father was dead, they said, It may be that Joseph will hate us and pay us back for all the evil that we did to him. So they sent a message to Joseph saying, Your father gave this command before he died. Say to Joseph, Please forgive the transgressions of your brothers and their sin, because they did evil to you. And now please forgive the transgressions of the servants of the God of your father. Joseph wept when they spoke to him. His brothers also came and fell down before him and said, Behold, we are your servants. But Joseph said to them, Do not fear, for am I in the place of God? As for you, you meant evil against me, but God meant it for good, to bring it about that many people should be kept alive, as they are today. So do not fear, I will provide for you and your little ones. Thus he comforted them and spoke kindly to them. So Joseph remained in Egypt, he and his father's house. Joseph lived 110 years. And Joseph saw Ephraim's children to the 3rd generation. The children also of Machir, the son of Manasseh, were counted as Joseph's own. And Joseph said to his brothers, I am about to die, But God will visit you and bring you up out of this land to the land that he swore to Abraham, to Isaac, and to Jacob. Then Joseph made the sons of Israel swear, saying, God will surely visit you, and you shall carry up my bones from here. So Joseph died, being 110 years old. They embalmed him, and he was put in a coffin in Egypt. Once upon a time, they lived happily ever after. That lacks a certain flair for the dramatic, don't you think? There's no conflict, no danger, nothing really. Would you read a book knowing ahead of time that it lacked the elements of a good plot? In reality, that's what we would like many times in our life. We want to choose the elements of danger, like a good roller coaster ride, or drama, like watching a thunderstorm roll by in the distance, or conflict, such as a sporting event where our team wins because they're the favorite. We want our days filled with the bland of the predictable. But character is rarely forged in the lap of luxury and ease. It is in the furnace of affliction and struggle and challenge that true character is often developed. I think of it rather like muscle tone. In spite of what those infomercials tell us, getting in shape is not easy, and 5 minutes a day doesn't give us those ripped features they so often show us by their models in the ads. We're told in chapter 47, verse 27 of Genesis, that Jacob lived to be 147 years old. And he told Pharaoh that he was 130 years old when he met him, having come to Egypt, in chapter 47, verse 9. The math tells us that he lived 17 years in Egypt. So Joseph spent the first 17 years of his life with his father and the last 17 years of his father's life with him. The middle 22 years between ages 17 and 39 are what are the utmost concern, as the brothers once and for all had to settle accounts, so to speak. Jacob's life had been a hard one, for so he describes it to Pharaoh in Genesis 47:9. Jacob said to Pharaoh, "The days of the years of my pilgrimage are 130 years. Few and evil have been the days of the years of my life, and they have not attained to the days of the years of the life of my fathers in days of their pilgrimage." From the day he came out of the womb, clutching his brother's heel, it seems as though life had dealt him a harsh hand. But I wouldn't be so quick to characterize his life always that way. You and I have that luxury, not having endured what he did. We see the outcome in the big picture. The writer of the book of Hebrews mentions Jacob among the great ones of faith in Hebrews 11:20 and 21. By faith, Isaac blessed Jacob and Esau concerning things to come. By faith, Jacob, when he was dying, blessed each of the sons of Joseph and worshipped, leaning on the top of his staff. Stephen mentions Jacob in passing when he recounts the history of the patriarchs to the Jewish council at the close of his life. He describes it thus in Acts 7:14 through 15. Then Joseph sent and called his father Jacob and all his relatives to him, 75 people. So Jacob went down to Egypt, and he died, he and our fathers. Nearly all of the last half of Genesis is within the lifetime of Jacob. With the close of Genesis comes the close of Jacob's life and his burial. Yet there is unfinished business. Joseph's 10 brothers who conspired against him some 39 years earlier are finally, once and for all, having to deal with that situation that has long loomed in the background. The great procession that went up to Canaan has now returned, and with it the realization of unfinished business that must be resolved. The brothers still operate in the revenge mode, thinking that this is the way of all the world. Well, that might be a reasonable assumption, but it is far from where Joseph is. If we peer closely into the life of Joseph, we see a type of Christ. You remember a type in the Old Testament was a shadow of what was coming in the New Testament in Christ. Some of the shadows we find in the Old Testament are talking about the bronze serpent in Numbers 21:8 and Christ in John 3:14, or the Egyptian bondage of the Old Testament and that of the slaves to sin in the New Testament. and the manna from heaven in Exodus 16, and Christ, the true bread, in John 6:32. As it pertains to the type and antitype of Joseph and Jesus, we find that both Joseph and Jesus were despised. Both went down to Egypt. Both were falsely accused and arrested. Both resisted temptation to sin. Both were sold. Both showed compassion and showed pardon to those who did them wrong, among other things they shared in common. Joseph had already revealed, in spite of their wicked scheme, that it was God who sent him there in Genesis 45:5. Now again, Joseph must point out the bigger picture to them, one based on mercy and not revenge, one based on forgiveness and not bitterness. How astounding it must have been when they threw themselves at Joseph's feet and offered themselves as mere servants, and then to hear Joseph's reply in Genesis chapter 50, verses 19 through 21. But Joseph said to them, "Do not fear, for am I in the place of God? As for you, you meant evil against me, but God meant it for good, to bring it about that many people should be kept alive, as they are today. So do not fear, for I will provide for you and your little ones." Thus he comforted them and spoke kindly to them. Does that sound familiar? Take a look in the Gospel of Luke at the Father's reaction to the return of the prodigal son, who himself offered his life as a servant to his father. One wonders how many times we must read these accounts that reveal the great truths of God's mercy and kindness before we grasp how great his love is for us, and the lengths with which he was and is willing to go to secure our place with him in eternity. And as we close, think about this. How has this story of Joseph's journey affected you? And Lord willing, let's meet here again tomorrow and look at another of the great chapters of the Bible. Welcome back to another in our series of the great chapters in the Bible. Our chapter today is found in the Old Testament book of Exodus. Exodus chapter 3, Moses and the burning bush. Beginning in verse 1. Now Moses was keeping the flock of his father-in-law Jethro, the priest of Midian. And he led his flock to the west side of the wilderness and came to Horeb, the mountain of God. And the angel of the Lord appeared to him in a flame of fire out of the midst of a bush. He looked, and behold, the bush was burning, yet it was not consumed. And Moses said, I will turn aside to see this great sight, why the bush is not burned. When the Lord saw that he turned aside to see, God called to him out of the bush, Moses, Moses. And he said, Here I am. Then he said, Do not come near. Take your sandals off your feet, for the place on which you are standing is holy ground. And he said, I am the God of your father, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob. And Moses hid his face, for he was afraid to look at God. Then the Lord said, I have surely seen the affliction of my people who are in Egypt, and have heard their cry because of their taskmasters. I know their sufferings, and I have come down to deliver them out of the hand of the Egyptians, and to bring them up out of the land of a good and broad land, a land flowing with milk and honey, to the place of the Canaanites, the Hittites, the Amorites, the Perizzites, the Hivites, and the Jebusites. And now, behold, the cry of the people of Israel has come to me, and I have also seen the oppression with which the Egyptians oppress them. Come, I will send you to Pharaoh, that you may bring my people, the children of Israel, out of Egypt. But Moses said to God, Who am I that I should go to Pharaoh and bring the children of Israel out of Egypt? He said, But I will be with you, and this shall be the sign for you that I have sent you, when you have brought the people out of Egypt, and you shall serve God on this mountain. Then Moses said to God, If I come to the people of Israel and say to them, The God of your fathers has sent me to you, and they ask me, What is his name? What shall I say to them? God said to Moses, I am who I am. And he said, Say this to the people of Israel, I am has sent me to you." God also said to Moses, "Say this to the people of Israel: The Lord, the God of your fathers, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob, has sent me to you. This is my name forever. And thus I am to be remembered throughout all generations. Go and gather the elders of Israel together and say to them, The Lord, the God of your fathers, the God of Abraham, of Isaac, and of Jacob, has appeared to me, saying, I have observed you and what has been done to you in Egypt. And I promise that I will bring you up out of the affliction of Egypt, to the land of the Canaanites, the Hittites, the Amorites, the Perizzites, the Hivites, and the Jebusites, a land flowing with milk and honey. And they will listen to your voice, and you and the elders of Israel shall go to the king of Egypt and say to him, The Lord, the God of the Hebrews, has met with us. And now, please let us go 3 days' journey into the wilderness, that we may sacrifice to the Lord our God. But I know that the king of Egypt will not let you go unless compelled by a mighty hand. So I will stretch out my hand and strike Egypt with all the wonders that I will do in it. After that, he will let you go. And I will give this people favor in the sight of the Egyptians. And when you go, you shall not go empty. But each woman shall ask of her neighbor, and any woman who lives in her house, for silver and gold, jewelry, and for clothing. You shall put them on your sons and on your daughters. So you shall plunder the Egyptians. I am often amazed when I talk to people that I have known for some time and find something that I had not previously known. I remember my father in his later years telling me that he had seen Elvis in concert as a young man. Another man who had served in World War II had actually met General Patton. Another man had served in the real 4077 MASH unit in Korea. People weren't necessarily keeping secrets, but didn't always talk about their past. Many times it was at their funeral that something significant about their past was brought to light. Can you imagine being one of the people in ancient times and discovering that your good friend Moses was raised in Pharaoh's court? Or like Aaron and Miriam, discovering that your long-lost brother had been tending sheep in the middle of nowhere for 40 years. There are huge gaps in Moses' life. From the time he was found by Pharaoh's daughter in a basket among the reeds in a river at 3 months old until he was 40, all we are told is that he was raised by his mother, and when he was older, he was brought to Pharaoh's daughter to be raised. Stephen in Acts 7 tells us, verses 21 and 23, when he was exposed, Pharaoh's daughter adopted him and brought him up as her own son. And Moses was instructed in all the wisdom of the Egyptians. And he was mighty in his words and deeds. When he was 40 years old, it came into his heart to visit his brothers, the children of Israel. The writer of Hebrews gives us a little more insight into Moses' life when he tells us in Hebrews 11, verses 23 through 26, By faith, Moses, when he was born, was hidden for 3 months by his parents, because they saw that the child was beautiful. They were not afraid of the king's edict. By faith, Moses, when he was grown up, refused to be called the son of Pharaoh's daughter, choosing rather to be mistreated with the people of God than to enjoy the fleeting pleasures of sin. He considered the reproach of Christ greater wealth than the treasures of Egypt, for he was looking to the reward. You can live a lot of life in 40 years. But wait, there's more. All that the writer of Hebrews tells us of the next 40 years is this in Hebrews 11:27. By faith he left Egypt, not being afraid of the anger of the king, for he endured to seeing him who is invisible. Stephen gives us a little more in Acts 7 when he tells us, At this retort Moses fled and became an exile in the land of Midian, where he became the father of 2 sons. Now when 40 years had passed, an angel appeared to him in the wilderness of Mount Sinai in a flame of fire in a bush. That's 80 years. And his resume reads something like this. Born a Hebrew, put into a basket, found in a river by Pharaoh's daughter, raised by his mother as a wet nurse, so to speak, and educated in Egypt. Killed a man at 40, exiled where he marries a woman, has 2 sons, and shepherds sheep for his father-in-law for the next 40 years. That's it. In our recent U.S. history, a Supreme Court nominee had over 200,000 pages of documents about his work as an appointed judge for review. The process of vetting, or as we're told, the process of investigating someone thoroughly, especially in order to ensure that they are suitable for a job requiring secrecy, loyalty, and trustworthiness, according to the definition in the dictionary, is commonplace in our modern world. Yet Moses is chosen by God to lead his people in arguably one of the greatest mass immigrations in world history. Would you or I have put his name in for consideration for this job in today's world? Not likely. He would never survive the short list of nominees for the position and likely be laughed at. In fact, Stephen tells us that, in effect, the Israelites had rejected him once before. In Acts 7:35, we're told, this Moses whom they rejected, saying, "Who made you ruler or judge?" This man God sent as both ruler and redeemer by the hand of an angel who appeared to him in the bush. But God knows far more than we do and has forged this man into the shepherd he needs. Moses' reaction to learning that he has been chosen is really what is to be expected in Exodus 3, verse 11. Moses said to God, "Who am I that I should go to Pharaoh and bring the children of Israel out of Egypt?" It may be easy in our easy chair critic's seat, find it convenient to criticize Moses for his lack of willingness to accept the position of ruler and redeemer, as Stephen refers to him in Acts 7:35. But the reality is that perhaps that is part of the quality that qualifies him. After all, one day we will read this description of him in Numbers 12:3. Now the man Moses was very meek, more than all the people who were on the face of the earth. Now, I'm not saying that God was pleased to the extent to which Moses was willing to go to get out of his job. For eventually the conversation leads to this in the next chapter, Exodus 4, verses 12 and 13. Now therefore go, and I will be with your mouth and teach you what you shall speak. But he said, "O my Lord, please send someone else." God identifies himself to Moses in Exodus 3:14. "I am who I am." And he said, "Say this to the people of Israel, I am has sent me to you." Interestingly enough, this is exactly who Jesus identifies himself as when he says in John 8:57-58. So the Jews said to him, "You are not yet 50 years old, and you have seen Abraham?" Jesus said to them, "Truly I say to you, before Abraham was, I am." Have you ever considered how special you and I are in light of what Paul tells us in his letter to the Ephesians, in Ephesians 1:4? "Even as he chose us in him before the foundation of the world, that we should be holy and blameless before him." We may not have been chosen to build an ark, or to leave Ur of the Chaldees, or to languish in an Egyptian prison, or lead a nation out of bondage, or leave our nets and become fishers of men, or be called on the Damascus road. But we are chosen nonetheless. Have you begun to grasp that concept yet? And Lord willing, let's meet here again tomorrow and look at another great chapter in the Bible. And there you have it, another installment in our series on the great chapters of the Old Testament. I hope you have been edified, and I encourage to dive deeper into a study of the greatest of all books, the Bible. I hope you'll join us again, and we shall look into more of the great chapters of the Old Testament. And may God richly bless you in your search for the truth. And Lord willing, join us again next time.